Hello, America. This is Daryl Fielding, back again with another episode of The Triumph. We're excited to have back with us Don Rushing. He is a real estate investor, entrepreneur, and all-around good guy. So, Don, I want to bring you on the show today.
I like that. Okay. Good on the last part there. Yeah.
I wanted to bring you on the show today, Don, and get some of your insights. You know, the CDC, with all this going on with coronavirus and different things, has put a moratorium on evictions for
Right.
landlords and renters. I kind of wanted you to weigh in on that. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? I mean, it sounds like a good thing. And what are some of the implications you're seeing of that from not only as the renter, but possibly even as the real estate investor? What kind of dynamics are going to play out there?
Yeah, I think, certainly something needed to take place, right? Because when we have a government step in and say you cannot work, that means income isn't coming in. And for everyone in that situation, whether you're a tenant or just a regular homeowner, then now you've kind of got a problem because the government didn't step in and say hey, you can't work, and by the way, you don't have to pay anything until you can go back to work. So something needed to take place, right? I don't know. I'm never typically a proponent of government trying to solve our problems rather than us as individuals. I think we're far more capable of solving problems in the private sector than government is. There are times it needs to step in, but so yeah, something needed to take place. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? I typically stay away from, labeling something good or bad. In my mind, something either works or it doesn't work relative to what it is you're trying to accomplish. So if your goal is to protect tenants only in the short term only, then I think this moratorium put in unilaterally by the CDC rather than put to a vote of elected representatives, then I think that is a good thing if that's your only goal. But if your goal is to protect tenants long term, and your goal is to protect the economy at large, and your goal is to protect everyone within the country, then no, it doesn't work what they did. It just doesn't. So
Yeah.
What else? I mean, it's just I don't know what their goal was, and so, but in my mind, we want to protect people long term, and I don't even know that protect is the right word. I think more of, in my mind, we want to provide prosperity equally long term. So if that is the goal, if that was the goal, then this does not work.
Well, let me ask you this. So, I mean, I don't know how listeners might be looking at this topic, but some might be thinking like, hey, this is awesome. I mean, this really helps out because my job's unstable. But what do you see are some of the complications these are going to arise out of this for someone who's renting right now?
Yeah, and I think that's the true important thing that nobody's discussing. And so, yeah, in the short term for tenants, it gives them some relief, and so there's some short term benefit. But it's almost as if no one thought beyond that. Like that was just, and this is a common issue in our society right now, where a problem arises, and we just say, well, what do we need to do? Okay, we're going to do this, and here's the immediate consequence of it, and then nobody thinks beyond that. So that's just called the first level consequence, right? And nobody in yeah, I'm not seeing a lot of in fact, I'm not hearing any politicians or appointed officials talking about any of the consequences beyond the first level consequence. So no one's saying, okay, well, here's the first level consequence of what we're going to do, and here's the second level consequence, and the third, the fourth, the fifth.
So first level consequence would be like, okay, you don't have to worry about getting kicked out of your house.
Correct. That short term.
So we're like, okay, that's covered. But what would be an example of a second level consequence or a third?
Yeah, and I think it's going to go 4 or 5 or 6 deep on something like this. But the second level consequence, it could be, okay, will there be what's going to happen when this moratorium expires? And there are tenants that still are unable to pay because we still aren't letting them work. And now not only can they not pay, but now they have this huge debt, and then they're going to get evicted. So what's going to be, then what's going to be the consequences of those? What are the consequences going to be? Like how are investors and landlords going to react to this or respond to this? Could us putting out a moratorium or a directive like this backfire and actually harm the tenants by the response that we see from the investors? So what are we on? Number 3, number 4, could there be people that would just take advantage of this? Number 5, what's going to happen to the investors that don't have a lot of resources? Like what if it's just an investor that only owns one duplex or triplex, or 2 of those? Or what if they own a 4plex and they're living in one of the units and they're renting out the other 3? How will that impact them when those rents are no longer coming in?
Yeah.
Will they fall behind on their mortgage? And what are all the consequences to that? So I mean, it definitely goes more than 4 or 5 or 6 consequences deep.
Yeah.
But I call this lazy thinking. It's certainly not complex thinking to just say, well, we're going to put in this moratorium short term, and all it's going to achieve is a temporary delay on rents. That's lazy thinking. It's something we are kind of growing accustomed to in government.
Yeah.
But we really need to, if we really want to better our society, we need to be thinking more complex.
Yeah.
We need to start thinking about the other levels of consequences.
So let's take a tenant and kind of step through this a little bit from their point of view. So they may be relieved in the short term that they're not going to get kicked out of their apartment, but that doesn't remove all uncertainty. As things progress, they may lose their job. They have these rents that are essentially going to have to be paid back, right? They're not just being forgiven. Like once the moratorium's lifted, however many months have passed, that's what rent they're going to be owing.
That's correct. Now, I have heard in different parts of the country, there are state or local governments that are taking it a step further and putting in laws to the effect of, I've heard, and you'll have to check the validity, the listeners will have to check the validity of this, but one example I've heard of and that I have not researched myself yet is, perhaps in California, they've put in a law that says the tenant has up to 10 years to pay you back, possibly before any negative consequences or something like along the lines of, I don't know, maybe credit report or something, maybe. So we may see things like that pop up. I think the first point I would really want to touch on, though, is, and this is really coming from the reason, I wanted to weigh in on this is I haven't heard anyone talking about this from the context of what are the consequences going to be to tenants and renters. And I think that's really an unfair thing that's going on, just in the sense that, and hey, I know life's not fair, but that doesn't mean we have to, intentionally omit information that's going to harm people. So from a renter standpoint, there's going to be some consequences from this moving forward in our country. I think you're going to see the face of renting change from the standpoint of, number one, I'm wondering if, I think we have a high probability that from here forward in the United States, we're running the risk now because of this directive. And I think if this directive gets extended beyond December 31st, 2020, it's just going to continue to increase the likelihood of this, which is, I'm concerned we're going to see higher security deposit requirements for renters. The reason I think that's a high likelihood is, well, one, I work in the investment world as a consultant and, in the real estate world. And so I'm bumping shoulders with these people daily. And so I'm just kind of, going off the conversations that I'm hearing, and the idea of increased rent deposits is a big one right now. And here's why, because the rules of the game just got changed. Prior to, what was it, a week or two ago when this, it was right at Labor Day weekend, I think is when this came out. Prior to this directive coming out, the rules of the game was we let the market, we kind of play out on its own, And overnight, the federal government steps in and says, we are changing the rules. And we don't care that if you're an investor and that you've taken the huge risk of investing in real estate and providing housing for people, we don't care. We're changing the rules. And we're instituting a four-ish month moratorium on evictions. We don't care if someone doesn't pay. Well, so now from an investment standpoint, they're going to be thinking, okay, well, now we live in a reality where overnight the government can change the rules like that. How do I safeguard myself from that in the future as an investor? Because by the way, I know there's a lot of angry sentiment about people with money right now, and I think a lot of people, it's always funny, like our perception of who has money is always a little skewed. And even if they do have money, like from an investment standpoint, if they didn't purchase these homes, these units, and rent them out, who would? So like if you're angry at the hand that's providing this housing for you, I think that's just not a very empowering way to be looking at it, because if the investors didn't do it, that only leaves one other option, and that's the federal government that's going to provide housing. we only need to look around, pick any government housing project and take a look around, and you tell me if that's a place you want to live. Like, the
Yeah.
government doesn't know how to successfully run housing projects. And the reason the government doesn't know how to do that is because the government doesn't have any risk if it doesn't work out. So, because people are going to keep paying taxes, so the money's going to keep coming in. If my housing project didn't work out, who cares? Now, if an investor, if it doesn't work out, I care, because the money's not going to keep coming in. So you're really not wanting to be in a position where the government is providing our housing. And it also reminds me of something Henry Ford said, and I'll just paraphrase, but he said something along the lines of, anyone who believes that the government can provide prosperity and happiness should spend some time among the American Indians. And so, if you want to see how it goes when a government tries to provide prosperity and happiness, take a ride out to a reservation, and you tell me if that's what you want. So you really don't want to get in that position. And so for investors to, continue to provide this housing, and by the way, if you go to the website for the Census Bureau, you can look this data up, and you can see, and they track it quarter by quarter and have for decades, and you can see how quarter to quarter, year to year, the percentage of renters, of the population that are renters in the United States, roughly is 35%. Sometimes it goes down to about 31%. Other times it increases to about 39%. And those fluctuations, if you look at that data on the Census Bureau's website, coincides with recessions. And with every recession, the percentage goes up, right? So, roughly 35% of our population rents, and it's kind of always been that. So, like, we're talking about more than just over 1/3 of the population that this is going to affect, and that investors provide housing for. So thank you, investor, for doing that, because it's a way better option than the federal government. And so now investors are going, well, like, I'm an investor. I'm not going to clock in and clock out somewhere. I'm not going to go get a job. I'm going to keep doing my investing. And okay, so how do I adjust to this as an investor? And so an investor is going to say, well, if the government can step in and change the rules of the game overnight, okay, how do I adjust this? Oh, well, if now that I live in a new reality where I know now that the federal government can come in and just say, hey, no one's got to pay rent for 4 to 6 months. As an investor, I'm just going to simply say, oh, no problem. I'm going to require 4 to 6 months rent up front when you sign a lease. And so thank you, federal government, for passing that on to the person who could least afford it, which was the tenant.
Yeah.
And that is what I call lazy thinking. That is the epitome of lazy thinking. How you do not have the forethought to even think beyond the end of your own nose, I don't know. In fact, I suspect, I swear, there's a part of me that suspects it's intentional, to just keep screwing these people, basically. These are the kind of policies that grow the wealth gap. And that's exactly how they grow the wealth gap. It just gets passed down the line to the person who could least afford it. So now imagine, as a tenant, like, gosh, where am I going to come up with 6 months rent? And an investor, like, yes, they're there to provide housing, but they're not there to, like, we live in a society that operates off of money. So guess what? Kind of everybody is trying to make money, right? And so, yeah, I'm there to provide housing for you, but I'm taking this huge risk by putting all this money on the line, that if it fell apart would wreck my world and follow me around the rest of my life. So like, I've got to protect myself. And I think that's the first thing you're going to see. Now, I think over time, if this is what we see, you can adjust to that, because now if that just becomes the norm, you're going to have that money saved up if you're moving to a new rental. And maybe it's something where we can say at the end of the lease, maybe you can use a portion of that to maybe your last 1, 2, 3, 4 months of rent. Maybe. I mean, I'd hate to do that though, as an owner investor. And then during that 4-month period, the government come out overnight and put some kind of new directive in place. And, so maybe,
Yeah.
but that's the one I'm worried about the most for tenants, is if we see that shift. And so my point is if you're a tenant, you're listening to this, I'm trying to give you a warning, because it's only going to hurt you worse if you get caught off guard. And
Yeah.
so I think this might be a new reality that you might see coming. And so it's certainly something you don't want to get blindsided with a 6-month security deposit equal to 6 months of your rent, right?
Yeah. So let's say we have someone who's renting that's listening to this podcast, and they're like, okay, I get it, Don. I get the warning, the train's coming. I don't want to just sit here and let it mow me over. What can I do to be proactive to try to mitigate maybe some of the impacts of this policy that I didn't get to vote on or choose? It's just coming. What are some things you would recommend?
Well, I think we can discuss that in the context of one of my other points that I think it could be a negative effect of this directive, which is, if you're a tenant and you're finding yourself out of work, and let's say this moratorium goes by, or let's just say you find yourself out of work. Let's start there. Of course you want to be looking for work, but depending on what part of the country you live in, that may be a pretty tall order, right? This is an interesting recession in the fact that it's the different policies are affecting areas differently. So some areas are just, they're just laid out and they're just bleeding. Other areas are a little more insulated because the policies around COVID-19 are less restrictive. And so people are still going to work by and large. So if you find yourself out of work, the first thing I would say is just reach out to your landlord and just say, even if you're not behind, because here's the thing, like, communication is always the best policy. And gosh, I don't know, like, maybe some owners are just bastards. I don't know, maybe not likely, but maybe you're a little afraid of the response. It doesn't really matter if they're a bastard or not. I still think the best thing for you to do is reach out to them. Because reaching out to them right now, and you are insulated temporarily from any knee-jerk reaction should they be that type of person. So you really have nothing to lose temporarily for reaching out to them and just saying, hey, heads up, I want to be proactive about this and let you know I've lost my job. I'm looking for work. I'm anticipating finding something, or I'm anticipating being able to pay my rent, or I'm not anticipating being able to pay the full rent. If you can pay partial, I think that serves you a lot better. Anything, honestly. But hey, I understand, like, in this situation, you may be, well, do I pay rent or do I buy food? Do I pay rent or keep my phone on? Like, so just reach out to them and just, kind of clue them in. And I think you'll find that most people, most landlords, and this is a conversation I've had recently, and I'll tell you what, from my standpoint, I not only was impressed at the character of that individual, because I know that was a very difficult conversation for them to begin to start, right? So that tells me a lot about the character of this person. And, I can't help but have respect for that. So right off the bat, that sets a tone of, I'm dealing with someone with a lot of character here. And then, from my standpoint, so here's a little bit of advice for, or at least some food for thought. We don't really give legal advice here, and we don't give financial advice. We just start conversations. But some food for thought for landlords would be, hey, don't be a jackwagon about it. I get that it's stressful to you for this situation, but when did reacting to something versus responding to something ever benefit you? So look, it's tough for everyone. It's tough for them to start that conversation. So why don't you show the same character that they're exhibiting and just engage in that conversation with them? Because that's a display of character, just like them having the courage to start that conversation was. And so don't be a jackwagon and don't be a hard case. Like, find a way to work it out. And look, don't forget that they're a human and that you're a human. So both sides, like, hey, let's just remember we're human and we're all in the same community, and the way we build a better community is we communicate rather than, attack each other. So,
Right.
so that's kind of the one, like if you're for a tenant, reach out to them, be proactive about it, and just keep touching base with them, and I've had this experience and they've touched base with me and, hey, we just negotiated something out. Look, I know what the lease says. And unfortunately, this is something I see in our area where some landlords or property management companies are just taking the hard line and just like, hey, my hands are tied. That's what the lease says. Oh, well, great for you. Like,
Yeah.
guys, like, that's not that's not how it's called problem solving. Like,
Yeah.
in fact, I'm reminded of the movie, The Founder. It's about the McDonald's, the building of the McDonald's franchise. And the founder of McDonald's, or at least who gets credited to be the founder of McDonald's, was breaking a contract that he had with the two McDonald's brothers who really did found McDonald's. And his line was so accurate. I don't think it's not really cool, but it's so accurate. And he said, contracts are like hearts. They're meant to be broken. So, for landlords, like, get over it. If contracts weren't meant to be broken, like, guys, we wouldn't have a court system, and 70% of the world's attorneys in our country to deal with this kind of thing. So, like, get over it. Contracts get broken. That's just, so what? The real what is, what are you going to do about it now? And like, work it out together, because that's how we build a better community. So don't take the hard line. Look, treat them as people. That's great that you have a contract. But don't use that to dehumanize people. that's only going to exacerbate this whole problem. So if we want things to get better, we need to get better. So, business as usual, which is, hey, that's the contract. Well, okay, that's just more of the same. So I guess we'll just keep getting more of the same. And by the way, if we didn't do things like that, you wouldn't see the federal government stepping in all the time. So, like, quit adding to this problem. Just, hey, let's work things out among people. We can communicate. And rule number one in communication is listening to understand versus listening to reply. So listen to them, both sides, honestly,
That's great advice. You really want to work for a win-win solution. Don, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to ask you some questions about the bigger picture of the market in general, how this affects everyone, both renters and landlords alike. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back, everybody. Don, thanks for staying on for another segment. Don, before we move on to like maybe the bigger picture and how that affects renters and landlords, I want to just maybe circle back around with the tenant again. You talked about some of the potential impacts of this moratorium on evictions with like increased rent deposits. What are maybe some of the other negative impacts that tenants might be facing due to this new policy?
Oh, thanks for bringing that up, because there are some important ones in there that I want to get the warning out about. Maybe they don't happen, and I hope they don't. But I think they're going to from here forward in America. And like I want tenants to be aware of this, because no one's talking about it, and everyone's just acting like life's going to go on as normal or get back to normal. So I think another impact you're going to possibly see is going to be less flexible lease terms. And the reason why you'd see less flexible lease terms is because, again, if the government can step in overnight and change the terms, well, I need them to just be less flexible. So when the government does that, like, we got loopholes out of it,
Mm-hmm.
And I've got a way to get out of that lease, and so I'm protected as the investor. So I think the less flexible lease terms that you're going to see, and then along with that, I think you're going to see stricter enforcement of lease terms, because a lot of times there's some flexibility. Maybe a landlord turns a blind eye to something, right? Or but now again, if the government can step in and just change the rules of the game, well, I need to be a little less flexible, and I need to be a little more stricter on the enforcement of my terms. And I think that's one that you can really see, because the moratorium is only, if you cannot pay your rent based off of, the effects of the COVID-19. The moratorium does not say if if your lease says you're not allowed to have a pet and you have a pet, that you can't be evicted. So I think, please, as a tenant, I think right now is the time to really be, punctual about your lease. So if you need to pull it out and read through it, I mean, I would venture to say most of them probably just signed it without actually reading it. And in their defense, it's like, well, I have to sign it if I want to lease this place, right? So, but now might be the time to pull that out, take a look at it, and make sure, particularly, please, if you have lost your work and are unable to pay, I'm really, suggesting that you pull that lease out, read through it. Do not get caught doing one of those other, some other violation, because you may get out, because an investor's thinking, look, this is bull. Like the government steps in and changes the rules of the game. Like I'm betting the investors are pulling those leases out, looking at them, and I'm betting the investors are calling the attorneys saying, "Hey, how else do I get these people out so I can get someone in that's paying?" So again, thank you, thank you, federal government, for just, making it tougher on the tenants. That was a really, really poor idea. But so now's the time to make sure you're really following your lease so you can't get kicked out for another reason. I think another thing, you could see is like that back rent doesn't go away, and maybe some state or local government somewhere may put in some rules about it's going to take that long to pay it back, which again is just going to end up harming anyone renting, because now the investor is going to go, yeah, definitely I need a year, 6 months or a year's rent for you to move in case this kind of baloney gets put in again. I can draw on that and pay my mortgage, right? So but that doesn't go away. And now what's going to happen, what could possibly happen, is they turn that over to a collection agency, and that ends up on your that ends up on your credit report. And great, that helped, because now my credit just got dinged, which means if I have to buy a car or take out some other type of consumer loan, my interest rate's going to be higher. Oh, that doesn't really help people who have less money. And so, and if I do have to go find a new place to live, that's showing on my credit report. So now I'm not going to be able to get in the nicest places. So I'm going to have to pick from the lower quality places to live. So that really didn't help anyone who doesn't have, or who has less money. So, be aware of that. And that's something, try to negotiate that with your landlord. By the way, if you lose your job, you can't find work, and the moratorium expires or doesn't expire, you know what, if you have another place you can go, if you can go to a family member or something, come in and just have that conversation with your landlord. And landlords, guys, be open to these conversations. Don't be a hard case. That's not going to improve anyone's situation, including yours. And tenants, see if you can negotiate an exit strategy, or landlords offer to negotiate some type of exit strategy where, hey, I'll let you out of this lease on good terms, without a mountain of debt building up and following you around. We can create some type of win-win situation here, that doesn't grow the problem. It actually helps the problem. So, and again, if we would just all do that anyway, you wouldn't have knee-jerk reactions from the government putting these kinds of ridiculous things in place. So let's take our power back, and let's say, you know what? Yeah, we have a contract, but hey, we are still have the right to negotiate some type of resolution to this contract that lets you move out on good terms. That's going to speed your recovery, and it's going to speed my recovery, because now I can get someone in. I mean,
Right.
am I crazy to think that that's the best policy?
I think that's great insight.
Right. And so then the other thing is that it's just the delayed eviction. So not only is that debt going to end up going to collection on your credit, the eviction is going to be on your credit, which means show up and fill out a lease application with that on your credit. You're not the only people, the only housing that takes people like that are going to be, the dumps, the places, honestly, that people shouldn't be living anyway. And is quite an embarrassment to our country that we do let people live that way. But nonetheless, that's where you're going to get pushed. So I would say take your power back, and take control, and take things into your own hands, and really work towards a resolution. I've had tenants lately that, got a little behind, and, we negotiated, oh, well, we'll pay this much here, so on and so forth. Great. That, hey, as a investor, that's cheaper than the place sitting vacant for a month or 2 months while I find somebody. And I've also, in the past negotiated those exit strategies. Like, hey, I understand. And maybe it's because I've been kicked in the teeth by life. I maybe that's it. Um, but like I get it, So if you come to me, I have nothing but respect for the bravery and courage of starting that difficult conversation. And I'm never going to think any less of you, because no one is immune to difficult times in life. And so, I'm just going to treat you like a human. You're not any less. Shit happening in your life it's not an indication of who you are. It's an indication that, it's an invitation to improve who you are. And so I'm not going to think any less of anybody if they come to me, and we'll create a win-win. That's the best policy.
And it's not really a us versus them. Like we're all in this
Yeah.
market. We're all, we're like two sides of the same coin. And so, yeah, trying to work a win-win and just communicate and work that out makes sense, I think, for everyone involved. We're going to take another quick break. Don, when we come back, I kind of want to talk about that and how that market is impacted by this for both sides, and what that means for the future. We'll be right back after this. All right, welcome back, Don. Thanks for staying on for this last segment here. So a lot of great advice. I mean, from the tenant standpoint, from the landlord standpoint, and really everybody stands to fare better if we just work together and try to come up with a win-win, because we're really kind of like two sides of the same coin. So I kind of want you to talk about, like, zoom out a little bit and talk just kind of bigger picture in the marketplace. I mean, because we're all in the same market, right? Whether you're a landlord or tenant, we're all kind of impacted by these policies and decisions. What are some of the things you'd like to share, insights you'd like to share as it relates more globally to the country as a whole, as the marketplace as a whole?
Yeah. What really bothers me the most about this type of lazy thinking, Daryl, where we were talking about, whatever's going on lately, whatever our deal is about just thinking about the first consequence of whatever directive we're going to put out or whatever policy we're going to put out. What bothers me the most about that lazy thinking is that it grows the wealth gap. That's
Yeah.
what really ticks me off about it. And that's why I almost wonder, because the people putting these policies out are wealthy. And so it makes me a little suspicious that, are they doing this on purpose? Is it a wolf in sheep's clothing every time they put this out with the appearance of they're there to help you, and all it's doing is benefiting those who are already, those individuals, and it grows the wealth gap, and it pushes more people into poverty or further into poverty. And that's what really ticks me off about it. But again, that's what makes me suspect, is this intentional? I don't know. It doesn't really matter. I think what matters is that we start these conversations, because if that is their intention, it's only going to work if no one's having the conversation. So, so as long as we can just get the oh, sorry, go ahead, Daryl.
No, they just it reminds me of that Ronald Reagan line where he said the scariest words are, "We're from the government and we're here to help." So I think it bears anytime, some scrutiny anytime policies are coming out, to just, it's like you said, not have lazy thinking, but really think through the further consequences. But yeah. So just maybe think of that.
Yeah, no, it's That is a funny one. Yeah, and it also makes me think of something else Henry Ford said, and I'll paraphrase again. He said, any as long as we look to the government to as long as we look to government and legislation to end poverty and inequality, poverty and inequality will always be with us and continue to grow. Something along those lines. One of the greats that walked the planet. So, feel free to go look that up and see exactly what he said. But that was the point he was trying to make. And, so many greats throughout history have pointed these things out, that, like, if you're counting on government to do it, that's like government and the law, like, that's the minimum standard. It's not that, and that's all it's ever meant to be. Like, we don't really want to be living in a society where we are counting the law as like the highest standard. Like, that's no, and laws can't do that. They're meant to be a minimum standard, and like, we're the ones who have to live by the highest standards, and that takes character. But again, if we want things to change, and I'm quoting one of the greats from history, Jim Rohn, and one of my mentors always points this out, Jack Canfield. Like, if we want things to change, we have to change. If we want things to get better, we have to get better. Like, it's really not that. It's not as complicated as government wants to make it. So, but getting back to growing the wealth gap with these kinds of policies and directives, the way it grows the wealth gap is it strips opportunity and freedom out of the marketplace. And when you strip opportunity and freedom out of a market, any market, that consolidates the opportunities to a smaller and smaller and continually smaller number of percentage of the population. And it's there it is. We just solved the mystery of why is the wealth gap growing, because we're for the last few decades now, we've continually been stripping out these freedoms out of the marketplace. And am I saying that we didn't need improvement? That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we relied on the wrong source to provide that improvement, which was the government. Like, guys, we were supposed to do the improvement as individuals, as as investors, as landlords, as business owners. Like, we have to, don't wait for a law. This idea that our current economic system, it all changed in the early 70s with a man named Milton Friedman. And we've experimented with his idea now, and it's a failure. We can see that. But his idea was shareholder supremacy, and that the idea he gave us was that corporations, their number one responsibility is to maximize shareholder profit within the bounds of the law. Horrible idea. I'm not sure how that got missed, that's a horrible idea. But now here we are, 4 or 5 decades later. Oh, yeah, that was a really bad idea. This is where we find ourselves. And so, but as these negative effects of that philosophy started unfolding in the marketplace, people noticed, oh my God, this is crazy. Like, greed is running things, corporations are making record profits, but they lay people off. CEOs do really bad things, and they get to retire with all the, with a benefits package of millions of dollars. But, thousands of people lost everything they had because of their decisions. so we're seeing these things happen and we're going, oh my God, we got to put some laws in place. Well, my point again is like, stop waiting for that. The law is the minimum standard. And if we're going to keep living by the minimum standard, we're going to keep seeing our economy and our civilization have more and more turmoil and deteriorate. So the less freedom, but our answer was to like strip some of the freedoms out of the marketplace, and understandably so, because if people aren't going to take the initiative to live on to a higher level and think on a higher level, then I understand why people want to step in, but unfortunately that's the lazy thinking. Instead of using your influence to suggest and promote different ideas. Milton Friedman, when he changed the way corporate America worked, he didn't put in a law. He wasn't a politician, he was an economist. And so he put out an idea and it caught hold, right? Like, this is how it's supposed to work. If you have something to say, think through it and craft it out really well and introduce that, start that conversation. Don't wait around for a law to take place, because when that happens, the more freedoms that get stripped away, the less opportunity there is, the more it consolidates opportunity for a smaller percentage of the population, and that grows the wealth gap. And it becomes harder and harder when there's less opportunity in a marketplace, because there's less freedom in a marketplace. That makes it harder and harder for people to break themselves out of paycheck to paycheck, or break themselves out of poverty. And it pushes more people into that. And look, if you think I'm wrong, then explain to me how the most successful, productive economy in the history of human civilization became that way. It was through freedom, and it was through freedom of the market. Like, that's it. And as those freedoms have gotten stripped away from the market, interestingly, our prosperity level has dropped, and the wealth gap's grown. So and we're moving towards this idea of take from the rich and give to the poor, like it's some kind of fantasy Robin Hood story. And by the way, Robin Hood didn't rob from the rich and give to the poor. He robbed the government, because the government had put so many stupid laws in place that it stripped the freedom out of the marketplace, and the only people who prospered were people in power. And so he robbed from them and gave to the poor people, which was all the common folk, right? All the citizens. So, let's just take the fog off of that fantasy story right there. He wasn't robbing from the rich and giving to the poor. He was robbing from the government. So, as we've lost freedom in our marketplace, our prosperity level has dropped, and the wealth gap has grown. So that's the thing that ticks me off about it is, we're moving towards this idea of more regulation, more taxes, and more laws, more just all that, more directives, more mandates, more big government and big law. And then, we can't figure out why the wealth gap's growing, because there's less opportunity in the market. That's it. This isn't, it really isn't that. I know the powers that be want to make it sound difficult because they want to confuse people, but it's really like, once you turn that noise off, and start looking at it and looking at how our economy's deteriorated, it becomes real clear. It's tied, prosperity is tied to freedom. The most prosperous nation in all of human history also happened to be the most free nation in all of human history. I wonder what the correlation there is. Like, it's not right. And as our freedoms have been stripped away and we're moving towards this idea of, the government can regulate everything. Yeah, that's called communism. That's Russia, that's China. There's less prosperity, you know, but oh, well, China's catching up to us. Yeah, because we're playing our game really poorly. Like, they could never touch us if we went back to playing our game by the rules we used to have, which is more freedom in the marketplace will win every time. Every time, less freedom in the marketplace will never be able to, so we're going the opposite direction. We actually need to decrease. And that sounds really scary, but look around. The most prosperous economy ever, the most prosperous people ever, it was because we've had the most freedom out of any nation ever. And those freedoms are being taken away. And what do you know? Poverty's increasing, wealth gaps increasing, opportunities going down, and the idea of communism is catching up because they're playing communism at the A level, China, and they have a lot of smart people and they play that game really well. The only reason they're catching is because we're not playing at our A level. We're probably at a D minus or a D plus, C minus. So, and we're still beaten. Like, our system's still better, but like, guys, let's get over this. And by the way, like, it, the people who come up with these laws and govern us, are they not molded from the same clay as us? Are they immune from the follies of being human, which is, the desire to control and manipulate, and the folly of, looking out for yourself when push comes to shove? They're not. They're molded from the same clay. Why do we turn these kind of ideas over to them? They're no better than us, right? They're not our finest. Do the finest among us aggressively and violently attack people? Do the finest among us disregard all the principles of communication and engage in us against them? Is this what the finest among us do? No. The finest among us have always, and the greatest teachers who've ever walked the planet have always promoted true freedom. And that is the best possible scenario for prosperity among the human race.
Well, Don, the whole purpose of this show is to really is about triumph, and to triumph each of us on our personal journey. It's about having information and being able to apply that information. And you shared some great insights today, but I think on a bigger level, just that mindset of not looking to the government or to someone else to solve our problems, but that we are a creative force, that we can change our own reality and make an impact. So, and that freedom and opportunity is what really promotes that, and that as a species, we're more inclined to be our best selves and get better results when we work together. Don, thanks for your insights. Any closing thoughts you want to share before we let you go?
Yeah, thank you, Daryl. I would point out that life can either happen to you or life can happen from you.
Yeah.
It's your choice. And, thanks for having me on. To the audience, if you want to, look up more of us, you can find us on YouTube at Entrepreneur Podcast TV is the name of our channel. You're welcome to look me up on Facebook. I do make public post there. So whether, you're on my friends list or not, you can see that. I'm out there actively trying to engage and start these conversations. And that's what our YouTube channel is all about, is just starting these conversations. So thanks for having me on, Daryl.
Awesome. Well, we'll link to that, and then you guys can get that on the Triumph podcast, and link to Don and his social sites. And thanks for listening, and we'll be back next time with more information and stories to help you on your way to your triumph. We'll talk to you later.